All right, you primitive screwheads, listen up.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
I ate his liver with some fava beans and a nice Chianti.
Here's Johnny.
Vanity. Definitely my favorite sin.
I am the devil, and I am here to do the devil's work.
The power of Christ compels you.
This is my boomstick.
What's your favorite scary movie?
Good evening, and welcome to Shiver, a horror movie podcast. We are your hosts.
I'm Daniel DeBona.
And I'm David Ulloa, and we have a Tobe Hooper double feature for you. Because last week we talked about Poltergeist, a classic Tobe Hooper movie, and this week we're continuing it with a cult classic Tobe Hooper movie, 1985's. Is it 85?
1985, yeah, kicking off the month of the space horror, Space Monster.
Space Monster with Lifeforce. So in a section that we're calling Naked Vampires in Space. I was going to say Naked Space, but space is naked. That's like by definition it is naked vampires in space. We are going to talk about this movie. And no one can take away the fact that it is a movie.
It is a movie.
This is a movie.
It was committed to film.
It was committed to film, and it was done so by one of the horror maestros. Now, whether you like it or not, I think that this is one of the great debates in horror and in sci-fi, because this movie, I'm not going to call it unique. It's not really unique, but it is different. So, Daniel, what did you think about this movie? I have an idea based on what you texted me yesterday, but what'd you think?
So throughout the course of human events, there have been a lot of monumental things that have happened, right? Some of them we know the exact dates of. November 11th, right? 1918, World War I ends, Armistice Day.
Mm-hmm.
July 20th, 1969, Apollo 11 lands on the moon. Man steps foot on the moon. Sometimes we only know a roundabout time of these momentous occasions. We know that sometime in the summer of 1666, an apple fell on Isaac Newton's dick and he discovered gravity, right? We know that it's we'll call it June 1752, Benjamin Franklin flies a kite and lightning strikes it, and he discovers that we can control electricity and how conduction works. And then one of the moments that seems to be forgotten by history but shouldn't is that glorious day at some point in the early 80s when Dan O'Bannon put down a script in front of Tobe Hooper and said, I just finished a book called Space Vampires, and this movie needs to be made now. This movie was like, I want to say it's like nothing I've ever seen, because in ways it was, but also it was like so many things that I've seen, and it was done so perfectly for what it was supposed to be.
Yeah.
This movie was start to finish fantastic if you like this kind of movie.
That's the key.
If this is your bag, this cheesy, Hammer-esque, British, bizarre comedy, nudity, space movie, then this is all of that shit at its finest cheese. This movie redefines that phrase eau de fromage that we coined a couple weeks ago when we were doing Return of the Living Dead. This fucking movie, Lifeforce, I texted you about 40 minutes into this movie and just said, dude, where has this movie been all of my life? 13-year-old Daniel would have watched this thing until the electromagnetic strip in the middle of that VHS tape didn't have any data on it anymore.
Oh, yeah.
This movie was so bizarre, and it was so funny, and it was, This movie, I've spent 24 hours wrapping every brain cell I have around this movie, trying to figure it out. And I can't put a finger on any one particular thing. There's two particular things, but there's not one particular thing that I can put my finger on that sells this movie. But man, this is the type of movie that reminds you that sometimes just brainless, goofy fun is all I need out of a horror movie. And saying all that, you'd think that it's never scary or never gruesome, but it has all of
It
that
is, yeah.
too. This movie touches on so many amazing things. And it's got so many great stills and so many great special effects. When this movie ended, I was just so happy. That's really, there are times that we've done some of the great movies that we've done on here, Hereditary, Crimson Peak. They're over. You're not happy. You just watched a spectacular movie, but you're not in a great place mentally. This movie was spectacular. This is one of the movies that makes me wish I did drugs, because I would want to do all the drugs and just go watch it again. I was enamored by Lifeforce on my first viewing last night.
This is what I had a hunch, because I feel like we know each other fairly well now. We talk once a week for an hour and a half, which is like significantly more than I talk to most of my friends. I had a feeling that this is the reaction you're going to have. And the thing is, you and I, we're so similar in a lot of ways until we aren't. And then I think like it's starkly different. So I'm like, okay, I don't know how this is going to land. And I felt almost like that guy who's setting up the first date with this girl, and he's finally got a shot, and he's like, shit, I really hope she likes bowling. That's what I felt like. Like, how is he going to feel about this thing? I'm so happy that was your reaction, because that's always been my reaction to this movie. I love how absolutely bonkers this movie is.
Yes.
And if there was one word to describe Tobe Hooper, I think it would be bonkers.
Yes.
Like that is his wheelhouse. It's satire, and it always has been. Even when we didn't understand that it was satire, it was always satire.
Right.
And that's why the pairing of Tobe Hooper and the genius, the absolute brilliance of Dan O'Bannon is just a match made in movie heaven.
Yeah.
I don't know that anything as perfect as this will ever come around again, because the only thing that is this perfect is like Return of the Living Dead, which O'Bannon directed himself. Like that is it. That's where it's at. Nothing makes sense. And if you are willing to go down the rabbit hole and just under 2 hours say, yeah, okay, you will absolutely love this movie. And the fact that it doesn't make sense helps the movie out, because this is totally a callback to those Hammer movies of the 50s. Your Quatermass in the Pit, your Quatermass Experiment, all those Quatermass movies, which are essentially just British versions of Lovecraft.
Yes.
And it's just, let's watch the world fall apart for 2 hours. I'm down for that, man, because really, when you stop and think about it, what makes sense about Lovecraft? Nothing. And yet he is one of the most celebrated pulp writers of the 20th century. So that's what you have here in this movie. You have Lovecraft, you have Hammer, you have a little bit of like Doctor Who, right, thrown in there. Like, it is so British. I don't know how Dan O'Bannon and Tobe Hooper, two American dudes, and they're like as American as it comes. Like Hooper's a fucking Texan.
Yes,
right?
I was about to say, I'm pretty sure Tobe Hooper's from Texas.
Yeah. And then you have Golan and Globus, which are two Israeli dudes producing the movie, right? And like these guys are the Canon Films dudes. And that's all really, you can sum this up as saying Canon does sci-fi horror.
Yes.
And now you know, like already you're picturing in your mind, like, well, there's got to be boobies. There's got to be violence. There's going to be special effects. They may not be good, but they're going to be special effects. And yet somehow you're already picturing in your mind what this movie is, and it's better than that, right? Because you're thinking, oh man, I'm thinking Cobra, and I'm thinking Missing in Action. Like, yeah, Canon was fucking awesome, and still is awesome. We need more movies like this today.
Yeah.
We take ourselves way too seriously today. There's so few movies that just have fun.
Yeah.
And this is one of those movies. And again, I go back to this idea that you don't need to have an original idea to make a good movie. Because that's always the thing that people say, oh, there's no new ideas. Motherfucker, there haven't been new ideas since the time of fucking Shakespeare. Shakespeare was ripping off, the classics of his time. All right. And if you don't believe that, just read the story of Amleth, and you'll see, oh man, this is just fucking Lion King, and Lion King is just fucking Hamlet. All right. It's the same fucking thing, just a little less incest. That's all it is.
No, just a little less.
Just a little less. So there's no original ideas, my man. Like, just fucking roll with it, but do it well. And O'Bannon and Hooper do nothing mediocre. They do everything absolutely stellar.
This movie is scored by the London Symphony Orchestra.
And Henry Mancini.
Yes.
What the fuck? You hear those strings, you're like, oh, that sounds familiar. That sounds like a real fucking movie. And then you're like, oh, it's Henry Mancini. That's why.
Yeah, this movie blew the doors off from its opening credits. Yeah. Like there was this movie. If the phrase "all gas, no brakes" existed in 1985, this movie created it. Yeah, there is no time to breathe in this movie. There is never a minute where they're like, let's give you a bunch of clunky exposition. No, there's none of that. It's just go, go, go. And man, that's great. That is great sometimes. And this movie executes all of that. And it just, like I said, we do this every week, and sometimes they're really good, and sometimes they're really sad, and sometimes they're awful. But man, this one is, and like you said, I'm glad that you compared it to Return of the Living Dead, because this is the most fun I've had since then. And I had a little bit more fun with this one, because, and I think it's just because while yes, it's not a new story, it was a little bit fresher than zombies, right? So it was just, God, this movie, man. So as we continue to talk about it, let's talk about the actual movie, right? So we're talking Lovecraft Modern Hammer style redux. That's a lot of words to say that this story is nothing new. It's cobbled, it's pieces of a bunch of other ideas cobbled together into a movie, but how well is it executed when you look at the story, Dave?
It is executed flawlessly.
Yes.
And here's why. Because O'Bannon understood that the story doesn't make any sense. And the story doesn't matter, because ultimately this is about destruction. This is a classic 1950s destruction movie.
Yeah.
You look at something like The Towering Inferno. You look at something like Airport
Adventure.
A Poseidon Adventure. Fuck yes. You look at movies like that, and that's what this is. That's exactly what this is. All right. It's just done in the rhetorical style of Hammer sci-fi horror. That's really all it is. And I've never read this book. I think it's just called Space Vampires.
It's called Space Vampires.
Yeah. You look at what Space Vampires was, because I've read up a little bit about Space Vampires, and there's a little bit of Space Vampires present there.
Yeah, a little bit.
I feel like the tone is there. But the plot is radically different. And yet I don't care. And I don't think that I don't care because I've never read the book. I don't care because it works so damn well.
Dude, I'm willing to bet that Colin Wilson, author of The Space Vampires, watches this movie and doesn't care. Like he's like, I didn't write that, but that's still really fucking good.
He apparently hated it.
Oh, so sad.
But he also I don't know that he loves much because he wrote this novel based on the fact that he hated Lovecraft, and someone told him, well, if you can do it better than Lovecraft, you do it. And this is what he wrote.
Okay.
Now, I don't know how good his writing is because I've never read anything else by him either. But the inspiration is definitely there. And really all you need to know about this story is astronauts go to investigate Halley's Comet, bring back space vampires to Earth, and plague is released on Earth due to space vampirism.
Ooh, space vampires in London.
Oh, nice. That was excellent.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Man, you know, I love this story. I love how crazy it is. I love that every single development is so Deus Ex Machina.
Yes.
Because if there was like one use of that classic Deus Ex Machina, then it would be like, no, what the fuck was that? But literally every single thing is like, why is it there? I don't know, because we wrote it in.
Yeah, because that's the turn we needed for this plot to work.
Exactly. How do you know this? Oh, by the way, when we did our space vampire kissing, we mind melded. That's why.
Why.
And you didn't want to tell me before? No, I didn't want to tell you before. Okay, cool. Now let's go find the next fucking clue.
Yeah, it's like, she can change her face and look like anybody. Why? Fucking cuz she's a space vampire, bro. Like, what's the whole up here?
She's always been able to do this.
Yeah, like,
you're
why are
just
you
finding out
questioning
right
this?
now?
Yeah, like, what do you mean why? She's a space vampire, man.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, really, when you stop and think about it, life is kind of like that, isn't it? Because like your mom or your dad told you once when you were a baby, hey, don't touch the stove because that shit's hot, right? And regardless of the fact that like it was new information for you, you touched the stove and you were like, God damn it, what the fuck? When did that thing get hot?
Right.
It's always been hot. You're just finding out about it now. And that's kind of how, and the interesting thing is that not all movies work with this philosophy. There's some movies that work and there's some movies that don't. And I think that how far a movie leans into that, those shenanigans is how much or how little it works within the story. If you try to include something like this in something penned by Michael Crichton, for example, does not work. Right?
Andromeda Strain, but
work.
But this way.
It doesn't work when someone takes themselves as seriously as Crichton does, and rightfully so. Like the guy's a legitimate scientist, right? Yeah. Then it's not going to work. If you were to find plot points like this in a Herman Melville story, it would take me utterly by surprise, and I would say, well, I'm fucking done, because I've just spent the last 10 pages reading about why that particular harpoon was best for whaling only from the year 1892 to 1894. When you're using that amount of authority, yeah, it's going to seem hokey. But when the whole shtick is, hey, guys, just trust me. I'm in.
Yeah.
I'm in. How does it work for you?
Dude, I loved that all the characters just embrace that shit. Like there's one moment where it's like where Carlson they find his escape pod and he's like, what I'm about to say is gonna sound crazy, so I don't know if you guys are gonna get it, and Kane's like, fuck you. he's like, yeah, no, tell us. We believe you already. And like, that's the one moment where they ever like broke this veil of everything is absurd. And then he launches into this ridiculous story, which we find out some of which is bullshit anyway. But I love, one of my favorite things about this is we're talking about like how British this movie is, how unapologetically British this movie is. And it's summed up in just about every single character, in the fact that one of the things that sells this is everybody is constantly taking all of this with a straight face. It's nonstop.
Stiff upper lip.
Yeah, it's nonstop saying ridiculous shit, seeing ridiculous shit, accepting ridiculous shit, and being like, pip, pip, cheerio. Like, and then they move on. Right? And every single character is that way. And so that's, you're talking about how far into it are you going to lean? Man, they leaned all the way in. Right. Yeah. We talk all the time about it's a delicate dance if you decide you're going to do camp, right? Because there's no shallow end play when it comes to camp. You got to be all in, or you got to leave camp alone. And this is a 20-foot deep end of camp. They have so much fun with everything that's in this, you know. So we find out that, okay, she's a vampire, but she doesn't drink blood. She sucks your life force. Right. And so that's how she keeps
Aptly
going.
named movie.
Yeah. Then all of a sudden there's this random 2-hour timer that's associated with between feedings, or
comes absolutely out of nowhere. And they make that assumption based on one observation, which is the least scientific thing I've ever seen in any movie ever.
One dude explodes after 2 hours, and then who we assume is the top of his class science guy in all of England, then has his stopwatch and goes, by my calculations, it should be happening to her in exactly 1 hour. Just going, because you noted the exact time the last dude exploded. You weren't all so just mesmerized by the fact that a human being just exploded in front of you that you were like, I know exactly what time that happened, and I will know when 120 minutes from now is. And it's all, and like, yes, I'm doing like a voice, but that's how they all take this. You know, like eventually they fly off and try to find lead vampire broad, and they're in some insane asylum, and while they're doing all this, her plan is actually hatched to destroy London and possibly the world. And what does the British military do? Put up a bunch of fences, and they're like, yep, sucks for London, here comes the bombs, and that's like it. And they're just like, yep, that's how it's got to be. We got 3 hours, it's just everything. It's ridiculous how, for all of the absurd things that are associated with this movie, the attitude that carries on throughout it is like, all right, what's done is done, moving forward. Right. It's such a bizarre, like Mary Poppins attitude to have about things, and it just, I was laughing. And I was loving it. I love that we get these bizarre story elements of, well, maybe this is where the vampires of lore come from. And it's like, it is. I know, because I kissed that girl vampire. Like, what?
Yeah. And then this bit of information that no one knows.
Yeah.
Except this one dude, like, yes, well, you would think to pierce it through the heart, but you're not actually piercing it through the heart. You pierce it through the energy center, which is exactly 2 inches beneath the heart. Who fucking comes up with this shit? Because it is brilliant. It's brilliant, so man.
Good. And then the whole, but one of my favorite things, he goes, and just like the vampires of old, they must be struck down with leaded ore. Like looking around, like, what vampires of old did this man research? Because this is the first time I've heard of leaded ore, let alone seen it thrown into vampire mythology.
But this is also incredibly Hammer. because if you watch particularly the Dracula Hammer series, every movie, like, they've got to come up with a new way to fucking kill Dracula, man, because it's like, shit, well, we did the sunlight thing already. All right, so what are we going to do next? I'm like, all right, well, I guess we could do like the holy water thing. Like, okay, fucking fine. Silver, yeah, that shit too. The cross. They start coming up with shit, so it's like running water.
Right.
Any running water. When the fuck did that enter into the equation? He falls into a river and dies.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert for those of you that have never seen the fourth Hammer Dracula movie. That's how he fucking dies. Where? I don't know, but I'm here for it, because if you establish a rule, just follow it.
Yeah.
And as ridiculous as these things are, they're consistent with the ridiculousness that's happening in this movie.
Yeah, no, it's just constantly ramping up. Then we find out, yes, that they can change bodies, and it turns out that the guard was actually the vampire, and the vampire made the guard's body look like his, which again, you're just like, oh, okay, so they can change other bodies, people's bodies too. Roger that. And you're just checking boxes, right? Because at this point, they could have said anything, and I bet,
it's a T-1000. Gotcha. Yeah, okay,
exactly.
Cool.
And so they're just constantly moving forward. Every line delivered in this movie moves it forward. Always forward, never back. And they progress this story at a breakneck pace for 2 hours. That's one thing we always give a chef's kiss when we pull up a movie and it's got that 90 minutes, but damn if this movie didn't use every single hour and 56 minutes that it had to progress that story from space shuttle finds spaceship to apocalypse averted. There's 2 hours in there, and they fully accomplish everything within the spectrum of those two things.
Well, this apocalypse averted.
Yes, this apocalypse averted.
Because
exactly.
I love the ending here, where it's like, we live to fight another day.
Yeah, and they
Halley's Comet will be back.
She's space's problem now.
If I could sum up this movie in one phrase, I think there's a phrase that we all know or all familiar with, thanks to the colonization of the British Empire. Keep calm and carry on.
Yes, exactly.
That is what this movie is in a nutshell. Keep throwing shit at us, but we're British, and we've got an American bloke with us, but we're British, so we're going to keep calm, and we're going to carry on. There is never an ounce of hurry.
No.
Anywhere. I believe 100% that even though we didn't see it, and it was cut out only for purposes of time, they stopped for tea every single time. That they went from one place to another before they went to the insane asylum for the criminally insane. They stopped off for tea and crumpets.
The world is ending, but no need to act like savages. they pour their tea and eat their pedophore. It's like, yes.
The crowd persists.
Yes. So I have a question for you about this movie. Actually, okay. I will take your literary side on. So when we've done this podcast in the past, we've done a couple movies that have really done a lot to further, a feminist kind of agenda. Has such a negative, connotation to it these days, but to further a feminist ideal, right? So my question for you is, this character of Matilda, played by Matilda May, the female vampire, do you view the power that she has to bring about the apocalypse in this, and as apparently the leader of this hive of vampires, do you view her role in this as a kind of feminist coded ideal that they created a character with, or do you view it as this really reductionist idea because so much of what she has is tied up in sex appeal?
If I didn't know better, I would say that there is a feminist reading to this. But the fact that it was written by Dan O'Bannon, I don't think so.
Okay, fair.
He is famously not a feminist, and I don't think that he ever intentionally wrote a strong female character.
Right.
I just don't think that his brain operated that way. However, we've talked ad nauseum, depending on the episode, about how once you release something into the world, it ceases to be yours. And once someone interprets something in a certain way, well, now it's out there. And in that case, then yeah, that is a possible reading for it. And I do think that there is a feminist reading for this. Much of my graduate coursework was in feminism. I am a devout feminist. So I look for feminist themes everywhere. And I do think that there is a sense of feminism to be found here if you look for it. Because there's a few female astronauts on the crew.
Right.
But they're as insignificant as everyone else in the crew is.
They don't pass the Bechdel test.
No, they certainly don't. The only crew member that really matters is Carlson.
Right.
So they're unimportant. Aside from them, the only other female character is the Space Girl, played by Matilda May. The thing with Space Girl is that she does not come to them. They go to her.
Right.
And they remove her from her environment. And they are the ones that sexualize her. All she's doing is existing. She's feeding in the way that is natural to her, which is to feed off life force. That's how her species exists. Now, if we want to spin that so that it's inherently evil, well, what is inherently evil? It's only ever decided upon by, to use the feminist term, the patriarchy.
Right.
Right. So she is the one who is sexualized. There is nothing inherently sexual about a person.
Right. And like
Ever.
I had this, I went through this same type of thing, right? Where my first thought was, okay, like a powerful female antagonist here. This
Right.
is this does well. Then I went on the downslope of yes, but all of her power seems to draw from this idea of being overtly sexual and drawing on that, which depending on the person that you talk to is a very strong and powerful feminist ideal, right? So I'm going back and forth with that. But I think that ultimately what I landed on here is we learned that she looks the way she looks and she acts the way she acts because she delved into Carlson's mind and created what he would view as the perfect person. So if we extrapolate from that her persona, because you go, oh, well, what about the time when she looks at the guy and says, oh, well, use my body. So so you extrapolate from the idea that she created her physical appearance based on the fantasies of Carlson, then it is not a very far jump to then say she would also, and she got her language there. That's how she knew English. It's a very small jump to say that would also be where she got her motivations, where she got her ways to tempt and lead on. If what she did was she dove into the mind of this guy to create what we were seeing as this space vampire, then I think that ultimately, written by Dan O'Bannon or not this way, we end up with a very powerful feminist antagonist here, because yes, what she does is use her sexuality and her feminine wiles, if you will. I mean, like what does he say? It was the most overwhelming feminine presence I had ever felt.
What a great line, and delivered by, I think, one of the most magnanimous British actors. And if you look at his career, like, he's a character actor.
Yeah.
He was never a like a leading man, but if you've ever watched like any amount of British television or film, you've seen this dude before.
Yeah. And so then you take the idea of, yes, that's what she used, but she used it because she learned it from a man. Then it becomes ultra feminist, right? Because then it becomes using your own strengths and weaknesses against you. And I think that ultimately we do end up with a prime example of like a legendary feminist character here in Space Vampire Woman, who is never given a name, so again fails the Bechdel test. But
exactly.
But I do think that we end up with a character who embraces a lot of the things that you go to look for in finding a character that you can hang that feminist label on. And so, it's interesting to look at the fact that she, like a draw for this movie is the fact that she spends the first half of it naked, and there ain't a damn thing wrong with that. And so you go, okay, so that draws your eyeballs, but then you really start to break down that role. And I think there's a lot there to be said about, kind of pushing that movement for the early 80s.
Listen, I'm here for it, because I find feminist readings in like the oddest places. And I love to interpret what could have been a decidedly non-feminist work as feminist, because for starters, I think that is one of the greatest ways that you can to the man.
Right.
I think that it's fantastic if you can turn something that was meant to be derogatory, intentionally or unintentionally, into something that is empowering, right? Like we've seen this with the use of the N-word in hip hop culture.
Yep.
And I think that is one of the most like ultimate forms of saying, no, fuck you, I have the power.
Yeah.
And whenever someone turns the tables on the power dynamic, eventually what you get is the people with power saying, oh no, this actually was meant to demean you. You should stop that.
Right.
Because anything that empowers anyone takes away a little bit of that power that the ruling class has over you.
I mean, to take this back to Lovecraft, when Matt Ruff wrote Lovecraft Country, and then it was turned into a TV show, it did that exact thing. It took this ideal of this, this eldritch horror that Lovecraft had worked so hard to create. And then it was like, look, what you did here was great, but you're also a dickhole. So I'm going to take your mythos and I'm going to put the fate of your universe in the hands of Black people. So eat it.
Precisely. To go back to the and that was a great show.
It really was.
Awesome.
The book is great too.
I haven't read it, but maybe that's something I need to rectify this summer. To go back to sexualizing, I think that we see this a lot with stripping, where there are really, I think, only two camps to whether stripping is pro-woman or anti-woman. And you either sit in the camp of, well, if you have to take off your clothes and sexualize yourself, then you are, putting your soul at risk or something like that. Right.
Right.
And then the flip side of that is, I know that you're already sexualizing me. So why don't I capitalize on that?
Yeah.
And take you for everything that I can.
Yeah.
Because as long as you're going to demean me in your mind, I can profit off of that.
I will bet. Yeah, it's capitalism, baby. Right? I mean, might as well make that money for something you're gonna do anyway.
Get the bread, right?
Yeah,
and
exactly.
and ultimately, I find that the most conservative of folk, which tend to be, now this is a gross generalization, and it's not always true, but I find that the most conservative of folk, which tend to be the most anti-feminist and pro-capitalist, I think that those two things often go hand in hand. They don't always go hand in hand, because I know a lot of feminists that are capitalist. They don't like that.
Right.
Because it's like, you're taking away the buying power that I have, and you're giving yourself power with it. But that's precisely why it's the most feminist thing that you can do. And we're talking about philosophy here, and there's no right or wrong answer when it comes to philosophy, because whatever it is that gets you through your life, so be it. If it's like, does this bring you joy? No. Okay, so throw it away. Like that
Right.
sort of thing. What was that woman? Coy, was it?
Yeah, something. The minimalist woman who, you had to hold everything and ask if it brought you joy, and if not, you toss it.
The problem is everything fucking brings me joy. So that
Yeah.
philosophy doesn't work for me.
Not me either. I'm like I'm looking over here to the bookshelf on my left, and it's like, yes, that's a dirty baseball, but I caught it at a minor league baseball game, so no,
Right.
I'm never gonna get rid of it.
I present to you Exhibit A. Look at my bookshelf. I get rid of nothing. Nothing, absolutely nothing. So that philosophy doesn't work for me. So whatever gets you through the day, so be it. However, not all philosophies are equal. And when it comes to something like feminism is ultimately about equality. And I'm glad you brought this up on Pride Month, where Pride is, yes, LGBTQ, right? And the rest of the alphabet that goes with it. It is about all of that, but it's also about equality in the grand scheme of things. And it's really important that we talk about these things in a movie where a lot of the criticism that's levied at this movie is, well, I mean, the movie's garbage because it sexualizes women. Does it do that? Yes.
Right.
But is there a way to see this as subverting what Dan O'Bannon, I can guarantee you, like, I'm not a betting man, but I would bet this month's mortgage that he was not writing this from the feminist perspective, right? Is there a way to turn the tables on this and say, no, this is an inherently feminist movie because of the way that Matilda May played this character, because of the way that I'm interpreting that presence there, like the strength there. She's a strong character, and we're going to get more to her when we get to Space Monster. But yeah, I think that there is a feminist reading here.
I agree 100%. Like I said, I was back and forth with it, but ultimately I think that this took a lot, like we were talking about that idea of stripping, right? It's like, okay, well, sure. Yeah. Okay. You can view this as me being degraded or whatever, but also this was your idea, right? You're the one who had these thoughts, and I'm now enacting them in a way that is putting you out of a position of power. So I do think that there's a subversion here that allows you to view the through line of this movie as a very feminist thing.
Absolutely. So before we spend the rest of the night talking about this, because I feel like we can keep going on and on and on. I mean, I've written so many fucking research papers on this shit, and I'm going to start to nerd out. Let's move on to our cast, right? Because our cast here in this movie is I mean, it is plentiful and it is spectacular. So in a section that we're calling Scientist Galore, who spoke to you?
My favorite character in this movie was Peter Firth as Kane.
Yes.
He was so great. And he was, like, we were talking about how everything is stiff upper lip. I mean, that was him. the whole time. Yeah, at one point he gets off a helicopter and they're like, "What happened to Percy?" "Oh, he's dead, I'm afraid." "Oh, okay." And then what's even better than that is the prime minister, who, yes, we do eventually find out is already a vampire. He just goes, "Oh, that's a pity," and then moves on.
Right.
Okay. But Kane is the fulcrum that allows for the balance of this movie between absurdity and buying in. Kane being dead ass in the middle of that balance is what allows for it to happen, because he is so deadly serious about every single thing that's happening that as a viewer, you now have to be deadly serious, no matter how ridiculous what you're watching happening is. And he lies firmly in the middle of the two sides of that scale and holds all of that on his shoulders. If at any point he had completely broken down or started to dismiss something as being outrageous, then it would have broken down the entire structure of this movie that allowed me as a viewer to just keep swimming. He was the guy that shouldered the weight of all of the absurdity in this movie that allowed me to constantly have a top tier level of buy-in. And he does it all while cracking jokes in a ridiculously dry British way. When Carlson's like, "She's a masochist. I'm about to slap her around and get the information. You might not want to see this." What does this motherfucker do? He sits down, crosses his legs at the knee, and says, "I'm naturally a voyeur." And it was like, what the fuck?
If you listen, I think that if you've never seen British humor before, it's possible that you go through those first like 45 minutes of the movie and not know that you're supposed to be laughing.
Yes.
It is entirely possible. But if you watch the rest of the movie after that point and you're not laughing your ass off, you can't be helped. Like that cannot be helped.
Yeah. And he just constantly just heaves this movie up on his back and trudges up that hill. And you have no choice but to just be along for the ride. I mean, everything that Peter Firth did in this role was incredible. He had me laughing. He had me buying in. I loved him so much. Like, then when I went and looked, and I was like, and so I was like, "Oh, Peter Firth." So then immediately I'm like, "Oh, is he related to Colin Firth?" Everything about Peter Firth very explicitly would like you to know he is in no way related to Colin Firth.
Right.
Just in case anybody else, I'll save you the trouble of going to find that. But he just, I don't know. Like, I don't know that I've ever seen anything else with this guy in it. He was rocking that like leather kind of high collar jacket the whole time, just took everything in stride. This man watched blood fly out of two people's bodies, creates another body, and then disappear, and still gets off the helicopter. Is like, "Yep, gotta keep moving forward." And it's like, there's nothing. There was no way to stop this man. There was nothing that he wasn't going to do to save his beloved London. And I loved him. I thought he was outstanding.
You know that he's going to keep you laughing your ass off with his very first line. When he's introduced, who is it? It's Barclay is his name? No.
Is he Falada is the first one that he runs into?
Not Falada.
One of the doctors at the beginning.
Yeah.
Bukowski, maybe.
Bukowski, that's it. Bukowski sees him and he says, Colonel Kane of the SAS. And his response is not to him, but to the reporters. He says, "Strike that from the record. This is strictly Section D." Though his delivery of that line, I don't even know what the fuck Section D is. But I've seen enough BBC shows that I'm like, this is just, low level stuff here.
Right.
And and they know, oh yes, we'll strike it from the record. Anything you say, Constable. Wow, man, like his deadpan is the deadest panist of all the deadpans that we've ever had on the show. I don't want to say of all time because there's a lot of really great deadpan out there, but wow, dude, just yes. I'm not going to say anything more than that because you really, I mean, you got it. Okay, now I got to make a decision here because Firth was my favorite. Okay, Patrick Stewart.
Yes,
as Dr. Armstrong. This guy gets like third billing, and he's in the movie for the sum total of like 10 minutes. This movie's almost 2 hours long. Now, I've been a Patrick Stewart fan literally my entire life.
Right.
A
majority of mine since Next Generation.
I don't remember. Next Generation started in 87. Remember, I was born in 87. So I don't remember a time in my life when I was not a Star Trek The Next Generation fan. Never. And I didn't discover like the original series until I was in college when those like high def like remasters of the show was coming out in sci-fi.
Right.
Today I'll tell you I'm a bigger Star Trek fan than Star Wars fan. But Patrick Stewart himself, whether it was Star Trek, whether it was Excalibur, whether it was that Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy miniseries that they did on BBC back in the day, like I have been absolutely in love with this man. And I'm not ashamed to say it, like just fucking in love with him. Not I love him, in love with Patrick Stewart. For as long as I can remember. And every single role. He could be Jean-Luc Picard, he could be Charles Xavier. Doesn't matter. The gravitas that he brings to that role is unparalleled. Ian McKellen is the only other actor that can go toe-to-toe with him, which is why those original X-Men movies are so perfectly cast. There is no one else in a movie where literally every character is perfect.
Right.
He is perfecter than the rest of them. He, as Dr. Armstrong, single-handedly has us believe that he runs the most amazing asylum for the criminally insane and also is the most evil man in the world.
Right.
So it's at once these people are staying in the Ritz and they're staying in Rikers Island.
Yeah.
Or Shutter Island. Yeah. Like there is all that in his performance. And the scream that he like just yells out.
Dude, when he gets hit with the needle?
That was terrifying, like actually terrifying. I don't think that there's many moments in this movie that actually scare me. I think that there's a lot that is scary about the movie, but as far as scaring me, like, oh, fuck, what was that? Where like I dropped my popcorn and I'm like, oh, shit. I was actually watching this movie while I was eating popcorn, or eating popcorn while I was watching the movie. The movie would definitely took
top billing
over the popcorn. It was just like Pop Secret. It wasn't anything awesome. Wow, dude. What a performance. But he does this in literally everything. If you are a fan of British programming and have never seen the 1979, I think it's 79, production of Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy with Alec Guinness as George Smiley and Patrick Stewart as Carla, who's the KGB agent. He's in it again for like 10 minutes. And wow, man, every scene is just better for him being in it.
Yeah, and if you only know Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy from the more modern movie, go watch this because it is far superior. And that movie's not bad. That movie's really not bad. But yes, that miniseries.
But they fuck with the timeline, and it doesn't exactly work for me. And I am a huge fan of John le Carre. Read the fucking books because the books are insanely good. Anyway, we're getting sidetracked.
Yes. So anyway, but yes, no, I love. One of the things that I love about watching Patrick Stewart do anything, and it happened a few times in The Next Generation, and it happened in this movie, is how quickly he goes from buttoned up, most proper man in the room to insane. Right. It's a switch that he can flip, and he gets hit with that needle and he lets out that guttural scream. And then you're watching him struggle to get out of this. I mean, and he hits the ground and he's still fighting. And it's so bizarre because you are so used to seeing Patrick Stewart so prim and proper in everything that he does. And you're watching him struggle on the ground against this guy. And it was incredible. I loved it. I loved seeing him. Did not know he was going to pop up. And so I mean, it was one of those moments where I just started clapping, like in my living room. I was like, didn't think it could get better. And there's Jean-Luc Picard. Wah, 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 wah. You know, like it was seeing him show up was spectacular. You're right. He was in it for like 10 minutes, but did a great job with it. I absolutely loved him. So I'm going to go to the other side of the Kane coin, the Colonel coin now, and talk about Stephen Railsback as Carlson. This man did such a good job of flipping that exact same switch that I was just talking about with Patrick Stewart. Yeah. We watch him, calm and collected, like going into this giant spaceship, which, by the way, giant barely begins to describe this thing. It was described as 150 miles long and 2 miles tall, which also, by the way, really sells the fact that it was written by Americans, even though it was supposed to be British.
Right.
Because they're constantly referring to everything in miles. But so he just like coasts his shuttle in there, and he's cool and calm. They take these on the first time we see him, and he's telling his story. As far as we know, this guy's 36 hours removed from his escape pod landing in Texas. He's now been whisked away to London, just cool, calm, and collected, telling his story. And then we get that dream sequence, and he's
what a dream sequence.
Yeah, I've had that dream sequence before. And so
I had it last night after watching the movie.
and he's you see him, and the way that his character completely changes when he's around the vampire woman. And the fact that it's completely believable to me that when he is within physical or mental proximity of this woman, he completely loses his mind. And you watch him go from solving the mystery of where to find this woman to completely insane and smacking around a nurse because he can see into her mind because what happened? Oh yeah, now since he kissed the vampire, he can see people's thoughts. And so he's like, she's a masochist. He's like grabbing her hair and smacking her. And he's like, no, she's into it. And it's like, whoa, pump the brakes. But that's how bizarrely different both sides of his character are. And there was never a minute where I'm watching Railsback portray this where I'm going, that feels shoehorned. Like it, he overacted that a bit. No, because he overacted everything. He was either too proper or too insane. And it was great because it just showed the amazing ability that he had to physically show us the power that this space vampire woman had over him. He was phenomenal in this. And I mean, and he spends half of his time on screen just sweating profusely and screaming nonsense. Yeah. You're like, yep. Mm-hmm. I mean, and it all just works. But the way that he delivered it all was so good. And the way that, like I said, you're just constantly like, yeah, okay, I'm here with you still. Let's go. Oh yeah, he touched your shoulder. So you know that he's actually hurt. Yes. Like I never once for an hour and 56 minutes did I ever go, okay. No, not once. And that is thanks to the performance of someone like him who did such an amazing job selling every bit of the nonsense that was this script.
Everything you said was absolutely perfect. So I'm going to add one thing and one thing only. When you have undeliverable dialogue, you either have Railsback or you have Christensen. One Mr. Hayden Christensen. All right. Think about everything that you disliked about the Star Wars prequels. Now, think about what percentage Hayden Christensen takes up of that. It's a pretty sizable sand, and it's itchy and it gets everywhere. That is what the right actor will do for the right part. Railsback is the right actor for the right part because this very easily, like almost anyone else, would have been a Hayden Christensen here. And I don't like to hate on Hayden Christensen because I feel like he's gotten enough hate for that. And I think a lot of that also has to do with the direction that he got.
Yeah,
but
time has done a lot to heal those wounds. When he showed up in Obi-Wan, I was like, okay.
Oh man, I lost my mind.
I was for you again. Yeah.
Well, before then, just his voice. You hear his voice at the end of The Rise of Skywalker, and it's like, oh man, that's fucking Hayden Christensen. That's my boy.
Yep.
Right. But I guess it's that sort of thing where it's like, we're family, and I can talk shit about my family, but you can't talk shit about my family.
Right.
So,
I've
I don't know if
suffered
that's
for this privilege.
It's like when I hear my students talk shit about Hayden Christensen, I'm like, shut the fuck up. you weren't there. You weren't.
You don't know shit.
Oh man. Yeah. Railsback was perfect, man. Absolutely perfect.
Yeah.
I'll talk about one more person. And that person is going to be Frank Finley as Dr. Hans Fallada.
Oh man.
I have not yet figured out how his name is dirty. I don't know, but it has to be. It has to be dirty. There's something about the name Dr. Hans Fallada. And maybe it's something that's going over my head. Maybe it's something that is like very, very 60s or something like that. I don't get it, but I know it's there.
But I'm looking at this guy and I'm like, that dude pulls.
Oh, I would never dream to pull his leftovers, dude. No, this guy's the man. This guy's the man. And every single line was delivered with such cool. Like this is the guy who, like, you ever have those professors in college where you were like, why the fuck is that girl there sleeping with him? And why the fuck is that guy over there sleeping with him? Like, I don't fucking get it. I don't get it. But it's that magnanimous. That's the word that I would use to describe it. There is a weight to this guy. Like, I hang on his every word. And it's not a quantifiable thing. Like, you can't say, like, yes, he has 174 on the magnitude meter. Like, that's not a thing. But it is, because you look at that guy and you're like, nah, it's the fucking man. When they finally it's just Kane comes back into the room and you see all of London falling apart.
A spectacular model of London, by the way. God, those are the little things that really get at like your 80s heart, is when you get that great, you can tell it's a model that they're burning, but it doesn't bother you and you actually kind of love it.
Not at all. Yes, I definitely love it. It's those things. Like, it's a gorgeous shot. And then he's delivering his lines looking at the destruction. And you're like, what exactly is going on here? I'm almost certain that he's a fucking space vampire now, but I don't know for sure because he's been the fucking guy the whole time who always knew, right? He's the man with no neck.
Yeah.
That's his role, right? And he plays it spectacularly, and his death, I think, might be the best death in the whole movie. Wow, what a fucking death. And he does it so well as a guy who has studied death. The fact that he now is about to discover what really happens when you die, like there's a little bit of that like childlike wonderment in his eye. He really does a great job of playing a very dynamic character that gets sublimated into the classic keep calm and carry on. He never once breaks a sweat, not even when he's turning into, this bubbling, boiling thing. It's stellar.
Yeah, I mean, and if you and this, not only is this guy amazing in this movie, but you pull his rap sheet, and this dude has got cred.
Oh,
Frank
yeah.
Finley has played Iago in Laurence Olivier's Othello.
Mhm.
I mean, this guy has done it all, and that's the thing about this movie. For all of its insanity, you start pulling up the like, what else have these people done? And it's like, this guy performed with the Royal Shakespeare Company, and I just watched his face bubble up, which, yes, as he got shot, still kept the complete stiff upper lip British thing, right? Just drops to his knees and goes out in style. He was so good. And yes, he's the one who's constantly just making the most unscientific conclusions of all time. And you're just like, I believe him. I would follow this man to the ends of the earth. And yes, whatever he says is law now. He carries that just perfectly. I loved him. I thought that his is about voice too. Just that voice, man, whenever he's talking.
Yeah. So much authority there.
Yes. Like, and so he was absolutely spectacular. I mean, this cast, for being full of people that I didn't really know, just ended up blowing me away. And so there is one more character that we've spent a lot of time talking about, but now we're going to dive into the other side of her persona and her two friends there. So we're just going to call this the Space Monsters, as we've done for the month of the monsters in the past. And this will be our chance to look at what was presented to us here as a space monster in this movie. So starting off Space Monsters Month, we are presented with space vampires, the most important one being Matilda May as the leader. So what do you think about this space monster that we're given in this movie?
Listen, as I think all good space monsters do, there's no explanation given. And I think that for space horror, the less you know about a thing, the scarier it is, because what is the thing that most defines space? The unknown.
Right.
The fact that we don't know where the ship comes from, who these people are, how they function. Like there's the fact that we are able as humans to determine that life force is what they feed off of. Like that's a wild, radical thing.
Right.
But it makes them incredibly scary. So like as a monster, this is really, really scary monster. The fact that 3 and really 1 monster can come to Earth and basically destroy one of the largest cities and threaten the existence of all of mankind.
She's destroyed planets before.
Yeah, man. Like this is what would happen if Sigourney Weaver had not stopped the alien.
Right.
Had it gotten to Earth, the destruction that it would have weaved is insane. And that's what's happening here, because what ends up happening is apocalypse on a level that you rarely see. And this goes back to the fact that this is designed to be a Lovecraftian horror. Lovecraft is based on the fact that we are a blip in the cosmos. Where this thing came from, we don't know. We don't have the technology to build a ship half the size of what this ship is. We certainly don't have the technology to have it be like bio-organic. Like
Right.
that's not something we can do either. And the fact that the other thing that defines Lovecraft is the fact that the horrors are always so foreign to us. And while this looks like us, the way it feeds, what it feeds off of, is entirely different than what we are, because we do consume to continue to live, but we're not parasites that like have something continue on in its own way. That's not how we propagate the continuance of our species. So this is an entirely foreign way of being. There are species like this in nature. There's a specific parasite that I'm thinking of that invades snails, and you can look up videos of this. The snails have, like, in their antennae, these little like rainbow things that start like pulsing, and it literally controls the snail. And all it wants to do is to get the snail to find other snails and then spread the parasite.
Yeah, there's something similar that does it to like ants too, until it eventually just like grows so big that it explodes out of their head.
Yeah.
And it takes over entire like mounds.
It's kind of scary when you start thinking that there are like the way parasites work. It could take us down right away. And any sort of like space horror that comes to Earth, I feel like uses a lot of this trope. The thing is that it's a really effective trope, man.
Yeah.
It's really scary. We just saw, and I say just, but it was a couple of years ago now, we saw how quickly COVID-19 spread. And all it took was, what, like 2 years for it really to go away?
Right.
You know, and it's still around. You know, there's still people at work that get it every now and then. They're like, hey, I'll see you in about a week.
Right.
But that's fucking terrifying, man. That's terrifying that something can spread so quickly and so absolutely, and then it turns you into something else. In the 80s, I mean, this is the middle of the AIDS crisis. If you want to continue to have alternate readings of this, is there a possibility that Dan O'Bannon, who had already written Alien, was worried about AIDS? It's possible. Right. There's and that's the beauty of a well-written monster, because Dan O'Bannon may not have been a feminist, but he was a good writer.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there is so much that you can apply to your own life today. And I think that's where stories really matter, when the emphasis is on the story and not on the plot. And there's definitely not an emphasis on plot here. You can find ways of applying that story to your own life and making it relevant today. And I think that this movie is as relevant today as it was in 1985, and is as irrelevant today as it was in 1985, because it really wasn't a contemporary story to begin with.
Yeah, I think that, you know, there are a lot of times when I find myself, I say a lot of times, there have been a few occasions where I have found myself having to try to...
I once did this thing.
Yes, exactly. There have been a few occasions where I found myself trying to explain to somebody what eldritch horror is.
Yeah.
And, you know, this is the type of movie that you can lean on if you're ever trying to explain to somebody what eldritch horror is, and, you know, talking Cthulhu turns them off, right? Eldritch horror is this idea that there are things so big, so powerful, and so old that if you gleaned to understand them, you go insane. Right. That's the best way to sum it up. And it's so perfectly done in this movie in a lunchable format, right? It's easy. It's easy to peel it open and grab the pieces and put it together yourself. And so this is Whereas you look at Mouth of Madness, when we did that, like a year and a half ago, we did Mouth of Madness when we did our John Carpenter triple feature. That one goes heavy on the parts of Eldritch horror that makes it hard for people to understand. This movie is Lovecraft Jr., right? It takes the idea of Eldritch horror and it makes it consumable by the masses. And so you can look at it as, okay, these space vampires, these 3 characters are scary because they are ridiculously strong. They can change forms. They're psychic. They apparently, they don't burn or whatever. You can take all of that and be like, yes, they're scary. Or if you have the background to delve into it more, you get into what you were talking about terrifies you, which is, can I wrap my head around something being 150 miles long, traveling through space? Can I understand the idea that these 3 things and maybe a handful of others that we see as the dead bats have destroyed planets before moving on? Can I not be terrified by the fact that her death really only resulted in her being teleported back to the ship and sent off? She doesn't die. We see all 3 of them reappear back in the ship. So you take from
with
that,
a 4th now.
Yes, with a 4th now.
Yeah.
So you take from that this is horror on a level that is bizarrely beyond my comprehension. And if you can understand that, then you've got a framework for what Eldritch horror is. And I feel like as we continue through space movies, I know with at least one of the other ones that we're talking about doing, that's going to be the theme when we find one that's really, really scary, is this idea that this space monster is something beyond our comprehension. It's something that we can't even wrap our heads around because we're as a society only so many, or as a planet only so many of like millions of years old as a cultivated society. We can't understand that there are things that existed before time, which is one of those things that's always weird when you start to try to talk about Cthulhu with people, right? It's like, no, he's like always been there. That's what's scary.
Right.
And so you take all of that and he perfectly packaged it in a way to where you could just enjoy it. As much as I loved Mouth of Madness, that movie my stomach was tight and my breathing was short the whole time because you're constantly fearing for your own life watching that movie,
and there's very little humor in it.
Right, but that's Eldritch horror, right? When you read good Eldritch horror, you should feel like you're awakening something by acknowledging its existence within that text. Right. That's what makes it work, and that's what Mouth of Madness did. What this movie did was take the idea of space monster and Eldritch horror, and it created something light and breezy while still. I mean, they're gone from London for what we can assume is 12 hours. And by the time they get back, they've quarantined the city and are 3 hours away from dropping a nuke on that motherfucker. This
escalated quickly.
Yes. And like at this point, yes, London is literally burning. The streets are just full of all of these bodies. That's how long it took. And so it is, you're right. There were very few moments in this movie that scared me. But I think that as a movie and as a space monster in this movie, they are terrifying.
Yeah. 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 So with that, we've only got a rating left to give here. So if you're new to the show, this might seem weird. We don't give stars. If you are a longtime listener or viewer, as I see that we've had quite a few viewers pop in and out here today, this is going to be something that you're familiar with. We only rate movies against themselves. We believe that movies should never be judged against other things. You should only appreciate a movie for what it is, not for what it isn't. So Daniel and I discussed before the show, and what we have come up with as a metric for our rating today is umbrella spaceship buttholes. So it's even better when you read it back. Daniel, out of a possible 5 umbrella spaceship buttholes, what do you give this?
So for as much as we've gushed about this movie, there is something to be said about the fact that this movie's not for everybody. It's really not. You've got to appreciate dry British humor. You've got to just appreciate Hammer and Cannon films. You've got to just have a place in your heart for this kind of movie. We didn't even get into the fact that the special effects in this movie are pretty fucking good.
They really are.
There are some fantastic special effects in this movie. There are some super 80s cheesy ones too. But there are some wonderful, the
practical effects are all really great.
Dude, when they're shooting up the male vampires and you can tell they're actually using squibs, it made me so happy because I'm so fucking
on their
tired.
bodies, not under clothing.
Yes. I'm so fucking tired of the same little digital blood splatter that we get on a shirt when somebody's shot. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, pay close attention next time somebody's shot in a movie, no matter how big budget it is. I was watching Bad Boys 2 the other night because I just needed something to do. And when Will Smith gets shot in that, it's the exact same digital blur of blood that pops up on his shirt. And I'm so tired of it. In this, it was a naked chest that bullets were flying into and blood was exploding out of. Spectacular. The practical effects in this movie are fantastic. The cast, amazing. Plot, no. Story, yes. Action, phenomenal. Look, this movie is the reason. This type of movie is the reason we say we don't rate it against anything else. Because no, this movie's not for everybody. And no, it's not going to win Academy Awards or anything like that. But I will be goddamned if I do anything less than give this 6 out of 5 umbrella spaceship buttholes. This movie was perfect. It was perfect. Every nonsensical line delivered perfectly. Every bizarre body exploding into dust looked amazing. I was so happy from the time that the string started in this movie till the time that we got the super 80s thing where the credits just start rolling real fast over the final scene.
Yeah.
There's not a second of this movie I would change. There is in no way a thing I could say that would make this movie better. And so I'm gold starring it. It's 6 out of 5 umbrella space buttholes for me.
I am also going 6 out of 5 umbrella spaceship buttholes. This is bold statement. This is the best piece of shit movie you're going to watch all summer.
Exactly.
It's not perfect. It may not even be great, but it is perfect. And it is great. And there's no way to describe this movie. And like you said, it's not for everyone, but you know who it is for? It is for me.
Right. And the first person I thought to text episode a while back when we did the original Evil Dead, friend of the show, Seth Key, I text him immediately and I was like, Seth, tell me you've seen this. He's like, no. And I was like, find a way to watch it now. Like, because I know him and I know this is for him.
I do this thing where I always have a second copy of the book Madame Bovary. It's my favorite novel. Okay. And whenever anyone asks me, and it doesn't happen often, but often enough, you might, imagine as someone who teaches literature, I get asked like, oh, what's your favorite novel? And I tell them it's Madame Bovary. 9 times out of 10, they haven't read it. And when I tell them what it's about and how I read the book, like my reading of the book, they're interested in it. And so what I do is literally the next time I see this person, I give them a copy of the book. Like, here, read it. You have to read this thing. And I always inscribe it because I feel like it makes that thing personal. This is that.
Yeah.
This is one of those things where it's like when someone is interested in this kind of thing and is willing to have a conversation with you about this sort of thing, for whoever that Whovian in your life is, who really loves Doctor Who but doesn't know an awful lot about other British movies and TV shows, for that person who's like, I really like Monty Python and the Holy Grail, but I've never seen anything else, give them this. Keep a copy of this DVD at home so that when you have that conversation with that person, you're like, hey, here you go. That is for you. And you can thank me later. And I'm going to start doing that. I'm going to start having a copy of this movie that I can just give to people. When we go to Spooky Empire in October, I'm going to keep like 10 copies of this with me. And I'm just going to ask people like, hey, have you heard about our Lord and Savior, Tobe Hooper? Because this really is the kind of movie that if you're into it, will become one of your favorite movies. And if you're not, you're really going to fucking hate this movie.
You're going to hate it. That is the other thing. If it's not your thing, you're going to hate this movie and probably won't make it through it.
No, and there's no middle ground. I don't see a situation where someone ever sees this movie and is like, oh, that was pretty good. Or, oh, that was okay. Or, I kind of didn't like it. No, you're either like, that was fucking garbage. Or, oh my God, are we hitting play again now? That's it. Those are the only two responses to this movie. And like you said, the production, we didn't spend an awful lot of time talking about production. Really, it's just now at the end. And we're at a minute or at an hour and 25 minutes. So, like, there's no time. But,
right.
Wow.
Yeah.
Tobe Hooper is a god. We talked about this last week when we talked about Poltergeist. We talked about this when we did Texas Chainsaw Massacre way back when. Tobe Hooper is a fucking god, and I will die on that hill. For some reason, people talk about John Carpenter and they talk about George Romero and they talk about Wes Craven, and they're like, yeah, it's the big three, but they're not, because there's the big four, and Tobe Hooper is up there. Yes. Because literally every Tobe Hooper movie I've ever seen, I fucking love. And he is such a technical guy. There's one shot in this movie, man, and it's such a simple thing. Carlson walks away and then it pushes in on on Firth. And it's such a simple shot. But it's so perfect. It's so absolutely perfect. And it helps us to visualize what exactly Hooper's trying to tell us here is like, yeah, no, he doesn't matter right now. What matters is going on in his mind right now. And he's about to tell us in the most British way possible. Fuck. So good. Masterful is this movie. So there you go.
Yeah, so the unanimous 6 out of 5 on that one. I mean, it's there, and like I said, you're like, and like you said, you're either going to agree with us or you're going to think that we're complete idiots for rating it that high. But like I said, this is the type of movie.
Either way, you're right.
Right, exactly. This is the type of movie that it perfectly explains why we rate movies the way that we do. So if you've enjoyed this, if you've hung around with us the whole time, thank you so much. We appreciate each and every one of you. Give us a like on anywhere you can find us. You can head to shiverpod.com. You can find links to all of our social media outlets. We are on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and Twitter. All of those at ShiverPod. If you're enjoying it, give some of our posts a share. We post funny stuff. We let you know what's coming up. We do a little bit of everything. Give something to share. Tell a friend about us. Leave us a review on Spotify. All of that stuff kind of helps us out. And the best way to reach us is through the Instagram DMs. I check those every day. So if there's anything you think that we forgot to talk about, that we said wrong, go ahead and let us know.
Absolutely. So on behalf of all of us here at Shiver, thank you very much.